Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about the most problematic note on a tenor saxophone. And that note is a high G. Not Altissimo G, just regular high G. All right, let's get started. I'm not going to get into the technical information about why this is because ultimately you can't really defeat it from that perspective. However, I will say this, when I teach people overtones, and if you go through my videos, you'll notice that I don't really have you playing any overtones off of the low G where it would be in that cycle or in that overtone series, except for one example, and I basically just tell you it's a horrible fingering anyway, but that's a different story. But for now, we are going to actually address the overtones off of a low G and what happens when you squeak that high G. Squeaking on that high G is an important thing that we can learn about a tenor saxophone, especially if you're coming from a different saxophone and you're moving to this beast here. This is a completely different kind of animal, and I do think it is the strangest of the four common saxophones. The reason why is because the resistance of this instrument is considerably different from that of the other saxophones. It's this weird low resistance thing, and you get used to this on alto because it has a certain kind of standard amount of resistance. You play it, you get used to the amount of pushback that you're getting from playing this instrument. So we're going to take a look at the harmonic series or the overtone series on a low G and what note we actually wind up playing when we squeak a high G. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, so let's take a look at what note we actually squeak when we squeak that high G. So it's an out of tune palm D. And usually we're doing something weird with our embouchure. Most of the stuff that I teach about problems with the saxophone have to do with embouchure because that's the biggest problem area. A lot of people, they teach voicing and whatnot. I think that, at least in the United States, I don't know about other countries, as little kids when we're in school, we have choir and we're singing and all this stuff, and you learn what to do in order to sing high or to sing low, and you're a little kid, you're just experimenting with these kinds of things anyway. And I think that it naturally transfers over to playing saxophone. So most of us don't really have issues with voicing. Mostly I teach embouchure, which is related to airspeed, this thing that people still don't believe in for some reason, that don't want to commit to embouchure. But embouchure is generally the biggest issue when it comes to problem areas on a saxophone. I am by no means implying or saying that studying voicing doesn't help or that it doesn't work. I'm just saying that the biggest issues that people have when it comes to saxophone playing are definitely embouchure related and applying way too much pressure. And you're going to get yourself into a lot of trouble playing tenor saxophone using a very aggressive embouchure. One of which is going to be that G. It is an inherently unstable note anyway. So what you want to start to do, and I only really start to teach people this if it's a big problem, because eventually you play the instrument more, you make sure that your equipment is much more comfortable, and you start to gradually overcome this. But usually I start to teach this for people that really have a problem with that note. Okay, and ultimately it's understanding the difference in what you're doing with your embouchure on that high G. beginning saxophone players, they generally wind up having a sore lip because they wind up biting. Long before I committed to a lip out relaxed embouchure, I had to take the piece of paper and the wax and put it over the bottom teeth and then play with the thing, and it started causing me all kinds of problems. And eventually I just got to a point where I was playing so much so often I had to just force myself to use lower tip opening mouthpieces with softer reeds. I'm just like, man, like what can I do? And I started thinking back when I was in Toledo, and this guy, a lot of us at Bowling Green, we'd go up to Toledo to get some jazz from a guy named Gene Parker who was teaching up there. And he sat down and he just explained this thing to me in the most brutal, beautiful way possible. And it was basically just the study of having a more relaxed lip out embouchure, telling me how long it was going to take for me to develop the muscles, develop this kind of control, but basically freeing up the reed to allow it to oscillate the way it's supposed to. This is going to help to give you the kind of control that you want. And he was one of those old school dudes. He's like, what are you playing on that crap for, man? I got to play for 5 hours. If I had to play that thing, man, I'd be dead after 10 minutes. What are you playing that thing for? So he let me play his instrument. And I was just like, man, I was a lot like you guys when you see me do this stuff with 4-star mouthpieces and whatnot. Just like, man, how are you making all of that happen? He tried my horn and was like, man, you're killing yourself, man. What are you playing on this for? And I'm just like, man, I play with a trumpet player. He's like, what are you trying to play louder than a trumpet for, man? You crazy? Get a microphone, man. Make these people give you a microphone. I'm like, yeah, why did I get a microphone? Why am I working so hard? Still took me some 20 years after that for me to finally commit, because I had to. So the more I started working on altering my embouchure, relaxing, so I can get more efficiency out of my embouchure, a lot of things started to change. So I want to show you guys some of these techniques now, and basically how it applies to playing overtones and really understanding what the difference between playing that G correctly is and doing something weird with your embouchure and making that note squeak. Okay, so before we get into that, I do want you guys to try something. Now, obviously, if you're in a performance, you cannot do this. But if you're practicing, next time you squeak, remember what that note is. Capture that squeak and try and find out what pitch it is and see if you can reproduce it. And then go back and forth between the regular note and the squeak. Let's focus on the embouchure for now. I'm going to go between the high G. I'm going to ease my way into a multiphonic, and then the squeak. I bet you didn't even know a saxophone could do that, but this is a fantastic way of basically just taking ownership of the notes that you play. So that way, now when you're starting to play, you can go, okay, I'm going to do that on purpose now. All right, so let's move on. Okay, let's take a look at this thing on the spectrogram up here and see what we're working with. So here's the G. Remember, this is a concert F. Let's try an A flat. So this is going to be a concert G flat. Okay, so this really is just all about finding out where your weaknesses are. Pick whatever note that you squeak the most on. It doesn't just work on G, but it starts to get unstable. And that G is a real doozy of a note. And just take ownership. Find out what it is that you're doing. Remember, focusing on embouchure. And then see if you can reproduce it. And then, obviously, don't reproduce it when you don't want to. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I got for you. See ya.